Number two for me is Beethoven from 1992, starring Charles Grodin, who passed recently, I believe. Yes. Bonnie
Yeah, he did.
Hunt, Dean Jones, directed by Brian Levant, written by John Hughes and Amy Holden Jones. And the quick logline is a slobbering St. Bernard becomes the center of attention for a loving family, but must contend with a dog napping veterinarian and his henchmen. So I watched this movie pretty much when it came out. So I must have been kind of, early teens, I think, at that time. To me, this movie kind of mimics sort of my own life in many ways, like I said, where my dad was not really a dog person.
Oh
And
yeah.
then he kind of came around. And once we had Bruno, he was the one who was taking him for walks. He was the one who was getting all his food and everything and, complaining, but also loving him. And then, once we had to say goodbye to Bruno, he was the one who was, we were all gutted, obviously, but so was him. So I think this movie was special when I watched it because at that time it was just, laughing at my dad saying that, oh my gosh, this is all happening, on screen.
Yeah.
So could we somehow get this dog? But as time has gone by, this movie has developed even more significance with me because of sort of how things turned out. Because we did get a dog, and my
Hmm.
dad had this journey. But aside from that, I think this movie, it's to me is sort of 90s suburban joy bliss movie where, every most things are happy and the stakes are pretty low for the most part until they do become high towards the end of the movie.
Oh yeah.
But I don't know, it's I was thinking about rewatching this movie as to how sincere and earnest this movie is, and you couldn't make a movie like this now for whatever reason. Wherever we are at as a society and people, that something has to be edgy and something has to be that, which I'm for as well. But I think it really struck me as to how sweet this movie is and maybe even corny at times, but it works. And maybe I'm biased because I have memories of this movie. I was,
Hmm.
like you were saying, I'd not watched this movie in, I don't know, 25, 30 years, but I was surprised by how much I remembered scene by scene, looks and lines and music drops. I remembered everything. So it just tells you, literally movies shape lives. So yeah, it was just a joy revisiting this movie. But a couple of kind of standing out things for me. I
Hmm.
think the dog montage or Beethoven's montage of him growing up and all the ruckus he's causing and how the family's adjusting around him and such. It's just so fun to watch, so beautifully shot from the dog's point of view. Um, and, to me, the other thing that stand out is that how Beethoven kind of owns the house and
Hmm.
owns the town. He's like the mayor, essentially. Walks around, obviously always eating at all times.
Right.
And then I love how the dog like gently understands every human's predicament and is so perceptive and kind of gently pushes them to get higher confidence or helps them in ways that just is so sweet to me. And I've had versions of that, Bruno, when if I was in pain or somebody was in a bad mood, he would do things like that. He would show up and bring a little toy or just be really perceptive and sweet. Of course, this is a movie, so it's heightened, but
Right.
I think that really comes across like and that has to work, for you to kind of be at the edge of your seat when all the bad stuff is happening in the third act of the movie where
Hmm.
not Bruno, sorry, Beethoven is being framed and might be put down, and this horrible vet and everything that's
Yeah.
happening with him. Oh my gosh, like for that to land on you, the previous half of the movie has to work,
Hmm.
and I think it really does. This movie forever has left like a slight doubt in my mind about vets, that what if they are terrible and they hurt my dog in some way and it's because of this movie. So yeah, I just think it's such a sweet movie, about a dog, and like you said, again, this is not a movie where this dog was kind of bought
Right.
This dog magically appears. And
Hmm.
that's another thing which me and my sister would talk about, that what if a dog just walked in somehow? And my mom and I, we would like laugh about that and just, imagine how fun life would be. And then it's a negotiation of this relationship, especially between the father character and the dog. Like it's not
Hmm.
all hunky dory from the beginning, and it takes a bit to kind of form that bond, form that relationship. And it still tears me up at the end when the father is there at the vet's office and is convinced that he needs to be put down and is
Yeah.
sort of holding him and crying, and it still gets me. And then the last thing I would say is that this movie could have been very simple and just very surface level, and in some ways it is, but I think there's a little bit of depth to it too that's happening, where the struggle between the dad wanting to be more successful in life,
Hmm.
this debate about should the mother go back to the workforce, how what the challenges of success versus family, and what's at stake. And in this time in the 90s, how are couples and families negotiating the power dynamics between them, and there are gentle nods to that, which they didn't have to do all that, but I think that's what John Hughes does. His
Hmm.
movies are, if you want to take them on the surface level, you can, and that'll be fun and happy and entertaining. But there's always some real life depth to it, and that's why this movie comes across as three dimensional, even though it's a
Hmm.
very simple story. Um, and then, yeah, I was looking at the IMDb box office of this movie. We've been talking a lot about simple movies or movies of that, like they don't make him like this anymore.
Yeah.
This movie made like $150 million,
A
something like that,
huge
which
hit.
is
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my number two. Beethoven will always be in my heart, and my love for big giant dogs continues.
Yeah, this I had a very similar reaction to you when I should say, like, I watched this as a kid, saw it in the theater at least once, maybe twice, and definitely like on VHS, when it came out, which I think was 91, you said. So I was like 10 or so
Yeah,
when this movie came out. But I hadn't seen it in, I mean, 30 years, right?
yeah.
And rewatching it, the same reaction as you, like what, like literally every scene I remember. I was like, how do I remember Beethoven like this? Like I hadn't seen the movie in this long, and it was, I must have watched it so many times that
That's
it
it.
had such an indelible impression on me. So that was definitely surprising. It was also interesting too, like watching this movie as an adult now, and as someone who has been a dog owner too, that the movie is basically about Charles Grodin and the dog. Like the
Oh yeah,
family are not really much of a thing. Like they wrap up the storylines of like, oh, the daughter wants to date a girl, or not a girl, a guy,
yeah,
and Beethoven helps him do that. It's like in the first 20 minutes, like all the kids' storylines are wrapped up. The wife is literally like a non-entity in the film.
yeah.
It's really about Grodin. And as a kid, I mean, I loved Charles Grodin as a kid and thought he was funny, but I guess you sort of identify with the kids because you're a kid,
Of
and you sort
course.
of don't realize this entire movie is basically a Charles Grodin vehicle along with a dog. And it's really about, he's the one who has the story arc
Yeah.
of, oh, this dog's so annoying, he's, I have to take care of it. And then at the end, he does love the dog. In that scene that you mentioned, which is very sad, when he thinks he has to put Beethoven down and he's saying goodbye to him and sort of saying, look, like, I know we had some hard times there, but I really did love you this whole time. And, this is really hard for me to do, but I have to do it, to protect my family, which is what,
Mhm.
because he thought the dog was crazy. And that's why, there was a situation where we put the dog down. And I think he really carries the movie, for sure, like Grodin does. And it's interesting too, like now as a dog owner, just seeing like how poorly behaved this dog was and how they had no idea of how to train it, how to do,
Oh
like
gosh.
you cannot have a dog act like this. Like I was like,
Right.
how can they, like, I get it's like funny and like, a comedy, obviously, so the dog has to be mispaid, but it's like, you shouldn't have your dog go through the garbage or do this or do this. It's
Yeah.
like,
Why is the dog in the bedroom? Why is the
yeah,
dog, all these places
right.
that, yeah.
It's like,
It's
but
our
as a,
fault, not the dog's fault.
no, not at all the dog's fault. No, the dog doesn't know any better. The
Yeah.
dog needs to have those boundaries set. And it's very, dog training is, as an owner now, is incredibly important. Discipline. They need a pack leader. They need someone to set guidelines and boundaries, and they
Mhm.
want to be trained and want to be told, don't do that, do this instead. And definitely, not anything you ever think about as a kid, but I'm like, wow, this movie should never be used as like a guide to how to have a dog. And then it's interesting you mentioned that too about the vet, because I, again, had forgotten the plot of this movie. But then once I started watching it, I remember that. And I looked it up actually on Wikipedia afterwards that, the Veterinary Association of America, because spoiler alert, the vet is the villain of the film. And he kidnaps dogs and basically tortures them for medical experiments.
Mm-hmm.
The American Vet Association was very upset by this movie and protesting it because you're basically painting a negative opinion of vets. And it was funny when I was like, I never had that impression was never left on me. So it's interesting that it did affect you in a way that is even to this day, you have a little bit of skepticism about vets. And that actor does such an incredible job too of doing like everything, I'm a nice guy. And then actually like, I'm super evil. Like he's like going to shoot the plot of the movie is basically, he's going to shoot Beethoven in the head to test a new bullet and how like it what it does to brain tissue. Like that is horrifying. And to put that in a kid's movie. And as a kid, it's like, you don't really necessarily even think about as that didn't leave a scar and impression on me, but as an adult looking at that, I'm like, oh my God, like talk about, they would never put that in a movie today. I feel like that would be a studio note immediately. It's like, we can't have the villain like shooting the dog hero in the head. And that's like the climactic scene when they have to save like, whoa, like how did that even make it, in a movie in 91? But yeah, no, I do think this movie did, still is fun. I mean, it's very, not like pejorative, but it's very silly and dumb. Like it's not, it's very straightforward, a lot of slapstick humor, but very funny. I think the movie still holds up. I mean, I saw the sequel in theaters, I remember. And then now there's like 4 or 5 direct to video versions of it that I'd never seen those, but I remember liking the sequel too as a kid. I guess there's like a female Beethoven or something in that one, if I remember the poster
right.
correct.
Yeah. Maybe
they always have to bring in the female. Yeah. Yeah, no, enjoyable movie. I almost did put this one on my list, even though I haven't seen it in 30 years. I'm like, no, Beethoven, like that's the dog movie that I think of a lot. And then when I saw it in yours, I'm like, okay, that'll be like my, didn't make it. But it was fun to rewatch and just realize like how much I remember from this thing from my childhood. It was weird. Again, kind of like 101 Dalmatians, almost like a fever dream watching this.
Mm-hmm.
But
I
fun.
think we're going to have a lot of that with these movies.
Yeah, exactly.
I do want to say about the family, and I mean, to me, I think, yeah, you're right. They don't have an arc or anything, which, as you know, I don't care about those things that much anyway.
Right.
I know you do.
Yeah.
For me, I think that is very important because we as an audience will not fall in love with the dog, and we would not be rooting for anything if the dog and the rest of the family doesn't fall in love the way they do. Like we have to see what this dog does to this family. And we also have to see the father see that, how much this dog means to everybody and what an, important thing he's done for all of them. We have to see that. Otherwise, the movie just completely falls apart. So yeah, they might be, window dressing in some ways, but I think without that, the movie is nothing. Leaving aside, of course, the fun jokes and the fun slapstick fun part. But from a story standpoint, I think that's pretty important. And so is the case with the mother, because ultimately, yeah, she doesn't have much to do, but that one line that she gets where she's like, while you chasing your dream, your family is going down the drain or what have you, while he's interested in pursuing this whole thing with David Duchovny. I'm like, gosh, I'd forgotten that you were in this, but you are.
Yeah.
And you're horrible and super weaselly and, slimy. but that's important. I think that's an important tension point in the movie. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, though, again, I will give Grodin more credit than the screenplay. I think the screenplay does a disservice to the characters. And Grodin's part is not really well written, I think. If you look at it, like he though is bringing so much to that role, and his acting chops of playing this sort of like beleaguered dad who then reluctantly falls in love with this dog. I mean, that is the meat of the story. It's about him accepting a dog into his life and into his heart. And the script, I just don't think does a very good job of selling that. And if it wasn't Grodin, I just don't think this movie would be as successful as it ended up being. I think just his performance and what he brings to that part, which I don't think is that well written, is what makes the movie enjoyable. And again, I wouldn't have thought about that when as a kid, but like now watching, it's like, oh, the movie works because of Grodin. Like what he's bringing to this thing is like, that's the love that I buy. Like the kids, it's just sort of like, oh, cool, a dog, this is fun. And then again, I think the Bonnie Hunt is more of just playing the housewife. But Grodin, like you see the struggles that he's under, you see, and even that it is hard for him to have that tension point of like, oh my gosh, I have to take this dog and put him down. And the only thing that once he crosses the line of endangering his family, then he actually becomes that protective father. And that's the growth for him. Because I think he's disregarded his family, as Bonnie Hunt said, for his own career. And I think this moment where now his family is threatened by this outside force of the dog, or thinks is threatened, that's when he actually becomes a real dad for his family and does something incredibly hard that he doesn't even want to do, but for the good of the family. I think that is the big turning point for him when he makes that choice of like, no, the dog's got to go. I'm sorry. Like you can't like attack my family, or so he thinks. Again, Beethoven is innocent. He's a sweetie. But I think that's the moment where he becomes a real dad. And I think that's that arc that he sells so well. It just definitely recommend Beethoven for all those folks who haven't seen it. Though odd that they don't put a lot of Beethoven's music in this movie. I thought that was odd too. Even the score, which I remember, like that theme too. I was like, oh my God, the Beethoven theme. And I was thinking like, was this a riff on any piece of Beethoven? I was like, no, total. Like you'd think they would use a little bit of like Beethoven, especially considering the music's, in the public domain. Thought that was a little odd as an adult looking back at it. But yeah, that score, I was like, oh my God, the Beethoven music. Like I haven't heard that in 30 years, but I know exactly what that's from.
So good,
it's a fun,
I mean,
it's a fun
they
film.
use it a little bit when he's being named, but that's
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Which I'm glad actually, because I think it feels very purposeful, as opposed to just like putting Beethoven soundtrack all over the place. It'll just, I don't know, it'll be odd. And
I just was expecting that for some reason now as an adult and a fan of Beethoven's music. Be like, oh, there's going to be a lot of Beethoven in this. But yeah, anyway, it's a great film, really fun. I'm glad you put this on here, and fun to rewatch it.
Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.